Before we get into the video, take a look at these t-shirts. For the gentlemen, there's Papa Squatch. For the ladies, there's Mama Squatch. And for the kids, there's Sasquatch in training. For a limited time, these shirts will be available only on mysteriesofcanada.com for $29 Canadian, or about $21 US. To get a closer look at this rare and elusive apparel, and support this channel in the process, please check out the link in the description. If we entertain the possibility that the mystery tunnel related by the Saskatchewan dentist might be the same secret staircase discovered by Ed Mullard, the oriental artifacts it allegedly yielded present the notion that the underground passageway was carved from the living rock by Chinese miners in days gone by. Considering the location of the structure, it seems likely that these excavators, if they indeed existed, were some of the many Chinese prospectors who participated in the Leechtown gold rush. Some alternative historians, however, in light of the dentist's testimony, might be tempted to add the secret staircase to the mystifying body of evidence indicating that Asian mariners arrived on Canadian shores long before John Muir's laborers disembarked in Nootka Sound. In the summer of 1882, a prospector made a fascinating discovery near a creek in Cassiar Country, a mountainous region in northern British Columbia which had been the site of another gold rush in the 1870s. While digging a shaft through soft sand to bedrock, the miner came across a cache of 30 Chinese coins about 25 feet below the surface. The coins were strung together, a cord having been threaded through the square holes that perforated their centers. Scots-Canadian ethnologist James Deans examined these coins shortly after their discovery and determined that they had been minted around 263 BC, during the reign of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. It might be worth mentioning here that a well-known Canadian author attempted to connect this find with the equally intriguing 1801 discovery of what were identified as copper Chinese coins in a spring near the village of Chillicothe, Northwest Territory. The author mistakenly identified Chillicothe as Chilcotin Country, located about 400 miles south of the Cassiar Mountains. In fact, Chillicothe is a historic city in southern Ohio, which served as the capital of America's Northwest Territory in 1801. Discounting the unlikely possibility that the Cassiar coins are brought into that northern country and buried by participants in the Cassiar gold rush, the prospector's discovery evokes the intriguing idea that ancient Chinese mariners made undocumented voyages to Canada long before Spanish, British, and Russian vessels breached the waters of the North Pacific. The ancient Chinese accomplished many incredible feats of engineering during the reign of Qin Shi Huang, who had brought an end to the carnage of the Warring States period in the misty recesses of China's crimson history, unifying the Middle Kingdom for the first time under his Qin dynasty. Among these were the construction of the massive Lingchu Canal, which connects the watersheds of the Pearl and Yangtze rivers, and the famous Great Wall of China, which sprawled across the empire's northern frontier, built to shield the Middle Kingdom from the warlike nomads of the northern steppes. When considered in the light of these spectacular projects, the radical concept of an ancient Chinese trans-Pacific voyage seems less incredible. More relevant to this intriguing potentiality is a mystical quest sponsored by Emperor Qin Shi Huang in the latter years of his reign. Desperate to escape death, the self-styled First Emperor tasked his court alchemists with discovering and retrieving herbs by which to concoct the Elixir of Life, a legendary potion supposed to confer immortality on those who imbibe it, which were said to grow in a distant land across the sea. According to an ancient Chinese history known in English as the Records of the Grand Historian, composed in the last century before Christ, a scholar named Han Zhong set out on this mythical errand with an impressive armada of seagoing junks, and never returned. Another of the emperor's sorcerers, named Shu Fu, is said to have made 2 costly voyages into the Pacific in search of the secret to immortality, disappearing on his second expedition in 210 BC. Legend has it that the alchemist discovered a distant land over which he proclaimed himself king. Although another Chinese history, written in the Middle Ages, identified this foreign domain as Japan, the voyages of Shu Fu and Han Zhong clearly indicate an ancient Chinese desire to discover a certain distant land across the Pacific. What might have inspired the ancient Chinese notion that another realm lay at the eastern end of what they called the Great Ocean? In her controversial 1972 book, Pale Ink, 2 Ancient Records of Chinese Exploration in America, American attorney and World War II codebreaker Henriette Mertz pointed to a historic text which he regarded as proof of an ancient Chinese knowledge of the New World, which might have predated the Qin dynasty. One of these ancient Chinese classics is a geography called the Classic of Mountains and Seas, the authorship of which many Chinese historians have dated to the Warring States period. Mertz argued that the fourth section of this tome, which details the geography and mythical inhabitants of a region called the Eastern Mountains, was a description of North America. Another alleged ancient Chinese voyage to the Americas was that of Hui Shen, a Chinese Buddhist monk who, accompanied by a crew of monastic brothers, embarked on a journey to a distant domain called Fusang in 458 AD, determined to spread the Dharmic religion to its inhabitants. The monks remained in Fusang for decades, eventually returning to the so-called Celestial Empire, as China was sometimes called, to tell the tale of their adventures. Some historians, most notably 19th century American folklorist Charles Godfrey Leland, have interpreted Fusang as a particular stretch of the west coast of the Americas. In his 1875 book, Fusang, or The Discovery of America by Chinese Buddhist Priests in the 5th Century, Leland included an English translation of a passage from a formal history of the Liang dynasty called the Book of Liang, completed by Chinese historian Yao Xilian in 635 AD. This passage is generally regarded as the best source on Hui Shen's semi-legendary voyage. According to this account, Hui Shen and his monastic brothers traveled to a land across the sea, whose peaceably inclined inhabitants relied heavily on the Fusang tree, a plant with sprouts resembling bamboo, which produced red, pear-like fruits. The natives wove the bark of the Fusang tree into clothing, and inscribed characters on its sheets in a written language unknown to the Chinese. They built their houses from wooden timbers, and were ruled by a king named Ichi. The horns of the oxen are so large, Leland translated, referring to the country's beasts of burden, that they hold 10 bushels. They use them to contain all manner of things. Horse, oxen, and stags are harnessed to their wagons. Stags are used here as cattle are used in the Middle Kingdom, and from the milk of the hind they make butter. After detailing the marriage and funeral customs of the Fusang natives, Yao related a strange inland tribe described by Hui Shen, which was supposed to be composed entirely of women. Leland only recorded the first sentence of this interesting passage, dismissing the whole as intermixed with so much fabulous matter that it is not worth translating. Fortunately, Henriette Mertz included the remainder of the text in her book Pale Ink, which had been translated at her request by an unnamed Chinese scholar employed at the Library of Congress. In this passage, Yao Xilian quoted some long-lost narrative allegedly written by Hui Shen, which follows. Hui Shen says that the kingdom of women is about 1,000 li, in other words about 350 miles, east of Fusang. The appearance of the people is neat and clean, and their color is white. Their bodies have hair, and the hair of their heads is long, reaching to the ground. At the 2nd or 3rd month, they enter the water and become pregnant. 6 or 7 months after, they bear their young. The female chests are destitute of breasts. At the nape of their neck there is hair, and milk is in the hair at the back of the neck, and the infant is fed by that milk. Within 100 days, the infant can walk, and in 3 or 4 years is adult. It is true. On seeing a human being, the women are afraid and hide. They have a great deal of respect for their husbands. The people eat a salt plant, the leaves of which resemble a certain Chinese herb, and they have a pleasant, pungent odor. The narrative went on to describe how, in the 6th year of the Liang dynasty, in other words 507 AD, sailors from the northern Chinese city of Jinan were carried by a strong wind to an island near Fusang. On going ashore, the narrative claimed, they found a people there whose language they could not understand. The women were like those of China, but the men had human bodies, with dogs' heads, and they made sounds like the barking of a dog. The people eat a small kind of bean or kernel. They wear clothing made of cloth. They beat down the earth, and make adobe for the walls of their houses, the shape of which is circular, and the doors or entrances resemble burrows. Incidentally, this brief account of dog-headed men living on an island in the North Pacific eerily accords with an old Gwich'in legend from northern Yukon Territory, recorded in 1895 by French Oblate missionary Adrien Gabriel Maurice in his book 3 Carrier Myths. According to the priest's informants, Gwich'in tradition contends that a race of dogmen formerly dwelt very far away in the west and beyond the sea, in the midst of a very powerful nation, among which magicians used to transform themselves into dogs or wolves during the night, while they became men again during the day. In his book, Leland made the case that the land of Fusang was really the west coast of Mexico, near what is now Puerto Vallarta, arguing that the natives whom the monks encountered were really the Mexica ancestors of the Aztecs. Whether or not Leland's interpretation is accurate, the narrative of Hui Shen is another undeniable indication of ancient Chinese interest in, and perhaps awareness of, a distant land beyond the Pacific Ocean. A third alleged Chinese voyage to the Americas, according to some alternative historians, was performed by sailors in the fleet of Zheng He, a great Chinese admiral who served the Ming Emperor in the late Middle Ages. This theory was perhaps most famously articulated by the late British Royal Navy officer Gavin Menzies in his controversial 2003 book, 1421, The Year China Discovered America. In the early 1400s, during the reign of the Ming Dynasty, China's so-called Yongle Emperor, or the Emperor of Perpetual Happiness, launched 7 spectacular expeditions called treasure voyages to various maritime kingdoms west of China, from the Khmer Empire of present-day Cambodia to the Malindi Kingdom of present-day Kenya. Although Chinese envoys and merchants had regularly sailed to northeastern Africa and Arabia by way of the Indian Ocean since at least the reign of the Tang Dynasty, which ruled China during Europe's Dark Ages, the Ming treasure voyages of the early 1400s constituted the largest and most impressive Chinese ambassadorial expeditions to the so-called Western Sea at that time. The purpose of the Ming treasure voyages was to secure tribute from the various kingdoms that bordered the Indian Ocean and solidify China's self-styled status as the Zhongguo, or Middle Kingdom, around which the world revolved. In order to effect this end, the treasure fleet would carry extravagant imperial gifts to the kingdoms in question, the magnitude of its ships and the quantity of its sailors tacitly demonstrating China's superiority to the inhabitants of these foreign lands. In preparation for this ambassadorial enterprise, the Chinese emperor commissioned the construction of around 60 colossal treasure junks, each of them crewed by several hundred to 1,000 sailors. Legend has it that half the trees in southern China were felled to supply the wood for the emperor's armada. The Yongle emperor appointed his favorite courtier, Zheng He, a Muslim eunuch from the Mongol province of Yunnan, the admiral of his treasure fleet, and in 1405, Zheng He led this so-called floating city, along with about 250 supplemental warships, on its first treasure voyage to the Indian kingdom of Calicut. Zheng He's treasure voyages successfully inched further west, and by his 7th and final voyage, which lasted from 1431 to 1433, the Chinese courtier sailed as far west as Kenya, where he received tributes of gold, giraffes, and African lions from the local Malindi king. When Zheng He returned to China after his 7th treasure voyage, he learned that his benefactor, the Yongle Emperor, had died. Yongle's son and successor, called the Hongxi Emperor, was an isolationist who had grown resentful of his father's expensive diplomatic endeavors. On Hongxi's orders, Beijing mandarins, or imperial officials, destroyed all of Zheng He's logs and records, and burned the enormous Chinese treasure fleet. Although most mainstream historians contend that no members of Zheng He's treasure fleet sailed further west than Kenya, a tantalizing illustration and an accompanying description drawn in the margins of a 1450 map of the world produced by a Venetian cartographer called Fra Mauro hint at some sort of nautical Chinese presence in the Atlantic Ocean. The image in question is a ship bearing great resemblance to a Chinese junk sailing west from the Cape of Good Hope. An accompanying description, written in Italian, tells of a ship from the Orient which was swept into the Sea of Darkness, or the Atlantic Ocean, by a storm in about 1420. Nothing but air and water was seen for 40 days, the description goes, and by their reckoning they ran 2,000 miles, and fortune deserted them. When the storm abated, the sailors of this luckless vessel managed to make their way back to the Cape of Good Hope, completing their return voyage in 70 days. While the illustration on Mauro's map raises the possibility that one of Zheng He's junks may have accidentally strayed into the Atlantic Ocean, Gavin Menzies' theory goes further, maintaining that some of the admiral's sailors made deliberate voyages of exploration far beyond the African continent. These epic journeys Menzies contended, led to Chinese discoveries of South America, Australia, and the west coast of Canada. One piece of evidence which he claimed supports his thesis is a 1513 map of the world, drawn by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis, which the Turkish corsair admittedly based on existing maps drafted by European and Arabian cartographers. Menzies proposed that a section of the map depicts Patagonia, the southern tip of South America, which was first discovered by Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan in 1520, a full 7 years after the completion of Reis' map. The only way Piri Reis could have known about Patagonia, he argued, is if the region had been previously explored by non-European mariners. There was only one nation at that time, Menzies wrote, with the material resources, the scientific knowledge, the ships, and the seafaring experience to mount such an epic voyage of discovery. That nation was China. Citing other charts, which he interpreted as depicting shores undiscovered by Europeans at the time of their composition, Menzies went on to propose that various of Zheng He's subordinates made extraordinary voyages to the farthest corners of the Earth, from the barren shores of Greenland to the ice-choked waters of Antarctica. One of these explorers was Admiral Zhou Man, whom Menzies submitted was tasked with exploring the Pacific Ocean west of South America. Menzies alleged that Zhou's travels brought him to Australia, Indonesia's Spice Islands, and back across the Pacific to the west coast of Canada. After sailing south to Central America, Menzies claimed, Zhou returned to China. Most of the evidence on which Menzies' hypothesis rests is speculative, including ambiguous coastlines on ancient maps, the presence of oriental fauna on the west coast of the Americas, and the rotten skeleton of a Chinese junk unearthed in Northern California. This author has, perhaps irresponsibly, decided to add another strut to this flimsy framework in the form of a strange discovery made by Northwest Company explorer Simon Fraser during his famous 1808 descent of the river that would come to bear his name. In late June of that year, Fraser and his voyageurs arrived at what would later be called Lady Franklin Rock, an island in the Fraser River near what is now Yale, British Columbia. There, they fell in with a band of upriver Hulkamalum natives who drew their attention to a mysterious lithic feature near their camp. At the Bad Rock, Fraser wrote in his journal, a little distance above the village, where the rapids terminate, the natives informed us that white people like us came there from below, and they showed us indented marks which the white people made upon the rocks, but which, by the by, seemed to us to be natural marks. To the imaginative reader, searching for evidence of an ancient Chinese presence on Canada's west coast, this anecdote might conjure up images of pale-skinned Han Chinese ascending the Fraser River in the distant past, perhaps members of Zhou Man's exploratory expedition, fresh from interring ambassadorial gifts of imperial porcelain in the hidden tunnel they excavated beneath Vancouver Island, or Buddhist monks led by Hui Shen in search of the hairy inland Amazons of Fusang. Eager to leave an immortal testament to their visit, these travelers inscribed an epigraph on a prominent stone. This peculiar ceremony would endure in the cultural memory of the native observers, compelling them to dub the scene of the incident Bad Rock. After years of natural erosion, the faded Hanzi characters left by the Chinese visitors, unintelligible to Westerners, may have seemed to Fraser and his voyageurs to be nothing more than natural grooves carved by the elements.